Smoke rose in twisted columns against the Afghan dawn, black and oily, curling into a sky that had forgotten the color blue. Somewhere beneath that darkness, 8 men waited to die. The radio chatter had gone silent 3 minutes ago, 3 minutes that felt like hours to the operations center at Bagram. The last transmission had been fragmentary, desperate. Overrun, say again, we are, then nothing. Just the hollow crackle of dead air and the collective held breath of everyone monitoring the frequency. Major Kestrel Vance heard it from 30,000 feet, her A-10 Thunderbolt II carving a lazy patrol pattern above the Hindu Kush. The call sign, Reaper 12, felt heavier than usual that morning, heavy like the depleted uranium round sleeping in her GAU-8 Avenger cannon, heavy like the 11 years she'd spent proving she belonged in a cockpit that old men said wasn't meant for her. She'd been third alternate for this rotation. Third. They'd only given her the flight because Patterson had food poisoning, and Ramirez was grounded for a maintenance signature he'd forgotten to log. Nobody expected her to do anything but maintain presence, to be a shadow against the mountains while the real work happened elsewhere. The controller's voice crackled through her headset. Any station, this is Chaos, Maine. Break. We have Prairie Fire at grid November Victor 472859. Ground team requests immediate close air support, how copy? Prairie Fire, the words that meant hell had come early. Kestrel's gloved hand tightened on the stick. She knew that grid, a valley that maps called Kamdesh, that locals called the place where empires went a-bleed. Steep walls, narrow approaches, thin air that made the warthog handle like she was flying through soup. 3 years ago, 2 Apache had barely made it out of there. 5 years before that, nobody made it out at all. Chaos, Maine, Reaper 12. I'm 18 mics out, full combat load, send it. There was a pause, longer than it should have been. Reaper 12, be advised, danger close situation, troops in heavy contact, multiple gun positions in elevated terrain. Recommend you. Chaos, I didn't copy your last. Confirm grid and talk me onto target. Another pause. Kestrel could almost hear the conversation happening in the TOC, the exchanged glances, the unspoken question. Is she really the best we've got right now? She banked hard, diving through 25,000 feet, the horizon tilting as mountains rose to meet her like stone teeth. The Pratt & Whitney turbofans spooled up with their distinctive whine, and she felt rather than heard the airframe shake as she pushed past 400 knots. Below, in a valley that maps couldn't adequately describe, 8 Navy SEALs pressed themselves into whatever cover remained. Their compound, if you could call 3 mud walls and a radio tower a compound, had become a kill box. Insurgents held the high ground on 3 sides, and the 4th side offered only a cliff face that dropped 200 feet into nothing useful. Team leader Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb counted ammunition by feel, his fingers finding only 3 magazines left, one of them half empty. Next to him, his radio man lay still, blood pooling beneath body armor that hadn't stopped the round that mattered. Webb keyed his radio with a hand that tried not to shake. Chaos, Maine, Viking 6 actual. We need that air now. Not in 5 minutes, not in 2 now. Viking 6, Reaper 12, I'm coming. The voice was calm, almost gentle. Female. Webb felt something twist in his chest that might have been relief or might have been its opposite. He'd flown with female pilots before, good ones, great ones even. But he'd also sat through enough briefs to know that the A-10 community was still a boys' club with narrow doors. And right now in this valley, there was no margin for anything except perfection. Reaper Viking 6, what's your position? 12 miles out, descending through Angels 15. Give me a target description. Webb raised his head just enough to see over the crumbled wall. Muzzle flashes sparkled from a compound 400 meters north, from a tree line to the east, from fighting positions dug into the ridge above. Reaper, we got shooters everywhere. Primary threat is a fortified compound bearing 015 degrees from my position, roughly 400 meters. Secondary positions along the eastern tree line and ridgeline above us. "We're taking fire from," an RPG shrieked overhead, impacting somewhere behind their position with a concussion that Webb felt in his teeth. From pretty much everywhere. Viking 6, I'm visual with the valley. Buddy lasing target now. 10 miles out, Kestrel eased the Warthog through 8,000 feet, her eyes scanning the landscape through the canopy. The valley revealed itself in pieces. A ribbon of brown river, clusters of compounds clinging to the slopes, the darker green of terraced fields that hadn't been worked in years. Her targeting pod slewed across the terrain, infrared sensors painting the world in shades of gray and white. Heat signatures bloomed in dozens of locations. Some were cook fires, some were vehicle engines, and some were muzzle flashes from weapons trying to kill Americans. She found the SEAL position first, identified by the IR strobe that only her sensors could see, a pulsing beacon that said friendly, don't shoot, we're the good guys. Then she traced the incoming fire backward, following the geometry of death to its sources. The compound Webb had described sat like a fortress, thick walls surrounding a central courtyard. Her targeting computer counted 17 heat signatures inside. 17 people who had chosen their side. Viking 6 Reaper, I'm going hot on the northern compound. Confirm friendlies are south of that position. Reaper Viking, confirmed friendlies are 400 meters south. You're cleared hot, cleared hot. Kestrel rolled inverted, pulling the nose through the horizon until the world was right side up again and the compound sat in the center of her heads-up display. The Warthog groaned through the maneuver, protesting in the thin air, but she held it steady. 7,000 feet. 6,000. The weapons selector clicked to guns, and somewhere beneath her feet, 3,000 rounds of 30 ammunition waited for permission to speak. At 5,000 feet, she squeezed the trigger. The GAU-8 cannon was built before the airplane around it. That's what they said anyway. The A-10 didn't carry the gun allowed itself to be carried. When it fired, the sound was unlike anything else in warfare. Not the pop of small arms or the crack of artillery, but a deep, resonant brrrrrrrrrrrrt that seemed to tear the fabric of the air itself. Depleted uranium shells, each the size of a beer bottle, left the barrel at 3,500 feet per second, crossing the distance to target almost faster than sound could follow. The compound's northern wall disintegrated. Not exploded, not damaged, disintegrated, reduced to powder and fragments and memories of what had been solid. The 30 rounds walked through the structure like a buzzsaw through cardboard, and wherever they touched, matter ceased to exist in any useful form. Heat signatures scattered, running, but the Warthog's nose tracked them with patient precision. Another burst, shorter this time, and the eastern wall joined the northern in oblivion. Webb watched from 400 meters away, his mouth open, temporarily forgetting that people were trying to kill him. "Jesus Christ," he whispered into the radio, not meaning to, the words slipping out unbidden. Kestrel pulled up, banking hard right as she climbed back through 6,000 feet. Her eyes were already scanning for threats, for the telltale smoke trail of a MANPAD, for anti-aircraft fire. Viking 6 Reaper, effect on target. Reaper Viking. Webb's voice held something between awe and disbelief. Northern compound is gone. I mean, it's gone. Whatever was shooting at us from there isn't anymore. But Kestrel wasn't finished. Her eyes were on the eastern tree line now, where muzzle flashes continued to flicker in her targeting pod. She could see them clearly, insurgents firing from prepared positions among the trees, concealment that would hide them from ground forces but meant nothing to infrared sensors looking down from above. She marked the targets mentally, calculating angles, wind, altitude, the 100 variables that turned flying into mathematics into violence. The radio crackled. Reaper 1-2, Chaos Main. Be advised you have additional friendly forces inbound, 2 Apache, call send Gunslinger 4-1 and 4-2, ETA 9 minutes. 9 minutes, another eternity. Kestrel keyed her mic. Chaos Reaper copies. I'll keep the party going until they arrive. She rolled left, lining up on the tree line, her thumb hovering over the weapon selector. Viking 6, next target is the eastern tree line. Confirm no friendlies east of your position. Reaper, Viking confirms. East is clear, nothing but bad guys. A pause, then, almost reluctantly. You're doing good work up there. She didn't respond to that. Couldn't afford to. At 4,000 feet, she pickled off 2 Maverick missiles, each containing a 125-pound warhead designed to destroy tanks. The missiles dropped from her wings, ignited, and streaked toward the trees at near supersonic speed. They impacted 2 seconds apart, and where there had been tree line there was now flame and shattered timber and silence. Her cannon followed, walking shells through whatever survived, methodical, thorough, patient. In the TOC at Bagram, the watch commander stood behind his tactical coordinator, watching the feed from an overhead Predator drone. The imagery showed the valley in stark black and white, showed the SEAL position marked with a blue icon, showed the angry red bloom of explosions as the A-10 worked through its target list. Around him, the normal chatter of the operations center had gone quiet. People watched. They couldn't help it. "Who is that?" someone asked. The tactical coordinator checked his screen. "Reaper 1-2, that's Major Vance." "Vance, Kestrel Vance." "Yeah." A longer silence. The watch commander knew the name, knew the reputation that came with it. She'd been turned down for weapons school twice. Not because she couldn't fly, everyone agreed she could fly, but because, as one evaluation had delicately put it, she demonstrates exceptional technical proficiency but lacks the aggressive instincts required for the close air support mission. Translation: she was too careful, too cautious, too concerned with following procedures instead of making the kind of split-second intuitive decisions that combat demanded. The watch commander watched her work and thought that maybe someone had been wrong. Kestrel climbed back to altitude, checking fuel, checking ammunition, checking the 100 systems that kept the ungainly warthog in the sky. The A-10 was often called the warthog, sometimes the hog, occasionally the hog if you wanted to be folksy about it. The official name was Thunderbolt II, a designation that honored a World War II fighter but that nobody actually used. It was ugly in the way that bulldogs are ugly, with a blunt nose, high straight wings, and engines mounted high on the fuselage where they could suck in less debris during low-altitude work. Fairchild Republic had designed it in the 1970s for one purpose: to kill Soviet tanks during a European war that never happened. 40 years later, it was still in service, still relevant, still the one platform that ground troops requested by name. The Air Force had been trying to retire it for decades. The Army kept writing letters asking them not to. Kestrel loved the plane the way you love things that are ugly but loyal, clumsy but dependable. It flew like a truck, handled like a truck, had the aerodynamic grace of a truck, but it brought you home. Always. She'd seen warthogs land with one engine, with hydraulics shot out, with half a wing missing. The plane was a survivor, and it made survivors of those who flew it. Reaper 1-2, Chaos, Maine. Gunslinger Flight is on station. Gunslinger 4-1 is checking in with Viking 6 now. Kestrel acknowledged, feeling a strange mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because 8 men would have a better chance with Apache in the fight. Disappointment because, well, because Chaos Reaper, I'm Winchester on Mavericks, still carrying guns and rockets. What do you need? Before Chaos could respond, Webb's voice cut through. Reaper, Viking 6. We got movement on the western ridge, troops in the open, maybe 20 dismounts moving toward our position. She was already turning, already dropping, the warthog's nose swinging toward the ridge. Her targeting pod found them instantly. A column of fighters moving through the rocks, thinking they were concealed by terrain, not realizing that thermal imaging made concealment a fairy tale. 20 contacts, like Webb had said, strung out in a line. The Hydra rocket pods on her wings each held 19 2.75-inch folding fin aerial rockets. She selected one pod, designated the target, and fired. The rockets launched in a ripple, 19 small missiles arcing away from her wing, trailing smoke. They impacted across a 100-meter spread, airburst warheads detonating above the rocks, sending fragmentation downward in deadly rain. When the smoke cleared, there was no more column, just stillness and stone. Viking 6 Reaper, Western Ridge is clear. Webb's response was quiet, reverent almost. Reaper, thank you. The Apache arrived then, two angular shapes that seemed more insect than aircraft, bristling with weapons. Kestrel monitored their check-in with Webb, listened as they assumed responsibility for the SEAL team's immediate protection. Her fuel gauge showed 3,000 pounds remaining, enough to get home with reserve. She'd been in the valley for 22 minutes. It felt like both longer and shorter. Reaper 1-2, Chaos, Maine. Viking 6 reports situation stabilized. You're cleared to egress back to Bagram. Chaos Reaper copies, egressing now. She climbed out of the valley, the Warthog heavy but willing, trading altitude for speed. The Hindu Kush spread beneath her like a topographical map, all ridges and shadows and valleys where men had fought for thousands of years over reasons that changed but war that didn't. She thought about the compound she'd destroyed, about the 20 men on the ridge, about the mathematics of violence. She didn't feel triumphant. Mostly she felt tired. The radio crackled once more. Reaper 1-2, Viking 6. Go ahead, Viking. A long pause. That was the best goddamn CAS I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot. Whoever you are, whatever they're paying you, it's not enough. Before she could respond, another voice joined. Reaper 1-2, Gunslinger 4-1, concur with Viking. That was textbook. Hell, that was better than textbook. Kestrel felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. Just doing the job, gents. Viking 6, you and your guys get home safe. Will do, Reaper, will do. She flew north toward Bagram, the morning sun rising behind her, casting her shadow long across the mountains. Below, in a valley whose name she'd barely known an hour ago, 8 men were alive who shouldn't have been. They'd tell stories about this day, she knew. Stories about the A-10 that came from nowhere, about the pilot who turned a certain massacre into a survivable morning. But they wouldn't know her name, wouldn't know her face. She'd be just another voice on the radio, another call sign, another ghost in the machine. That was fine, that was enough, that was the job. Landing at Bagram was routine, the Warthog settling onto the runway with its characteristic grace-free thump. She taxied to the hardstand, shut down the engines, and sat in the sudden silence for a moment before beginning the post-flight checklist. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence. Fuel cut off, battery off, ejection seat safe. Outside, the crew chief was waiting, and she could see from his expression that word had already spread. When she climbed down from the cockpit, the crew chief snapped a salute that was sharper than regulation required. Major, they're saying you saved a SEAL team. Kestrel pulled off her helmet, her hair damp with sweat. The airplane did most of the work, Staff Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. He didn't believe her, which was fine. Colonel wants to see you in the TOC soon as you're debriefed. Of course he does. The debrief lasted 2 hours. Intelligence officers wanted details, exact coordinates, observed enemy positions, damage assessment, ammunition expenditure. She provided everything methodically, professionally, her voice as flat as a technical manual. She'd learned long ago that emotion in these sessions was read as instability, so she gave them facts instead. Facts were safe. Facts couldn't be misinterpreted as proof that she didn't belong here. Afterward, she found herself in the TOC facing Colonel Madsen, the Air Operations Commander. He was Air Force Academy, F-16 background, the kind of officer who'd spent his career flying fast and high, and who viewed the A-10 community with barely concealed disdain. Low and slow wasn't flying. It was just falling with style. Major Vance, he didn't ask her to sit. Hell of a morning you had. Yes, sir. Viking 6 has submitted a personal commendation. The SEAL Command is talking about medals. General Mattis's office has already called asking about you specifically. She waited, there was always a but. But Madsen continued, right on schedule. We need to discuss your decision-making. You were third alternate. You weren't supposed to take that sortie. Patterson was sick, sir. Ramirez was. I know why you were flying. I'm questioning your judgment in responding alone to a prairie fire without waiting for additional assets. Kestrel felt something cold settle in her chest. Sir, the SEALs needed immediate support. 9-minute wait for the Apache would have been proper tactics. Madsen's face was stone. You got lucky, Major. That valley is a meat grinder. If you'd taken ground fire, if you'd been shot down, we'd be having a very different conversation. About the loss of an aircraft, about a rescue mission that would have put more lives at risk, about a pilot who confused heroism with recklessness. The words landed like physical blows. Lucky. She'd been called lucky. As if the 11 years of training, the thousands of hours in the cockpit, the endless study of tactics and weapons and aerial geometry meant nothing compared to gender and luck. She kept her voice level. Sir, I assessed the situation and determined that immediate action was required. I used appropriate weapons in appropriate sequence. I maintained awareness of friendly positions throughout. I followed rules of engagement. I completed the mission. You deviated from protocol. I saved 8 lives. Madsen leaned forward. You don't get to make that trade-off on your own authority, Major. You're not a one-woman Air Force. We have procedures for a reason. Kestrel felt the argument building behind her teeth, felt the words she wanted to say gathering like a storm. But she'd been here before, in rooms like this, facing men like this, and she'd learned that storms only proved their point. So instead she said, Yes, sir. Understood. Madsen studied her face, looking for something, rebellion, anger, weakness. Whatever he sought, he didn't find it. You're dismissed. She saluted, executed a precise about-face, and walked out. Behind her, she heard Madsen say to someone else in the TOC, See what I mean? Technical proficiency, no combat instincts. Outside, the Afghan sun was climbing toward noon, turning the air into something solid and bright. Kestrel walked back toward the flight line, her mind replaying the morning in fragments. The valley, the compound, Webb's voice thanking her. She thought about luck, about protocol, about the difference between procedures written in air-conditioned offices and decisions made at 400 knots with lives in the balance. Her phone buzzed, a message from a number she didn't recognize. Reaper 12, this is Viking 6. Got your info from Ops. My whole team wants to buy you a beer when we're stateside. You're our guardian angel, Chief Marcus Webb. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Stay safe, Chief. That's payment enough. But she saved the message. Despite everything, despite Madsen and luck and procedure, she saved it. Because maybe it meant something after all. Maybe it meant exactly what it was supposed to mean. The story of that morning spread through Bagram like wildfire, the way combat stories do, gathering embellishments and losing details until it became more legend than history. By evening, everyone knew about the SEAL team, about the solo A-10 that had held an entire valley by herself, about the pilot who'd earned her call sign in blood and fire. What they didn't know, what Kestrel didn't talk about, was how she'd gotten that call sign in the first place. Reaper. It wasn't badass the way it sounded, wasn't chosen for intimidation or because she'd racked up impressive kill counts. The story was smaller, more human, tinged with the kind of tragedy that military humor tries and fails to make light of. 4 years ago, fresh out of weapons school on her 3rd try, she'd been flying training missions out of Davis-Monthan. Her father had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, inoperable, the kind of diagnosis that comes with timeline instead of treatment. She'd flown home to Colorado every weekend she could, watching him shrink inside his skin, watching cancer work its patient mathematics. She'd been in the air during his final hour, flying a routine sortie she'd tried to cancel, but couldn't because the squadron was short-staffed. Her phone had 17 missed calls when she landed. 17 chances to say goodbye that she'd missed because she'd been at 12,000 feet practicing gun runs against imaginary tanks. The squadron had tried to be kind about it. Death waits for no one, someone had said at the wake, drunk and earnest. Guess that makes you the Reaper's daughter. The name stuck, got shortened to Reaper, became her call sign through the casual cruelty of military tradition. She'd thought about requesting a change, but that would have meant explaining, and explaining would have meant showing weakness, and weakness was not permitted for women who flew aircraft designed by and for men. So she kept it, wore it, let it hollow her out in small ways that she pretended not to notice. That night, unable to sleep in the transient quarters at Bagram, Kestrel walked out to the flight line and stood beside her aircraft. The Warthog sat dark and still, its nose art barely visible in the dim light, a stylized Reaper's scythe over the words Reaper 1-2. The crew chief had added tally marks below the scythe, one for each combat mission. There were 43 marks now, 44 after this morning. She placed her palm against the fuselage, feeling the metal still warm from the day's sun. "We did good work today," she whispered to the aircraft, to herself, to the ghost of her father who'd never seen her in combat, who died believing she was wasting her talent on a plane that would be retired before her career ended. "Talking to your airplane, Major, that's how it starts." She turned to find an older man in a flight suit, colonel's eagles on his shoulders, face weathered by decades of sun and altitude. She didn't recognize him, which meant he was probably passing through, rotating to or from some other corner of this endless war. "Sir." He waved off the formality. "Relax, Major, I'm not here to hassle you." He approached the Warthog, running his hand along its wing. "I flew these in the first Gulf War. Best aircraft the Air Force ever tried to kill." He glanced at her. "You're the pilot from this morning, the SEAL rescue." "Yes, sir." "Hell of a thing." He was quiet for a moment. "I heard Madsen gave you shit about it." Kestrel stiffened. "Sir, I don't think I should." "He gave you shit," the colonel continued, "because he doesn't understand what you did. He's a fast mover guy. To him, close air support means dropping a JDAM from 20,000 feet and calling it a day. He's never had to thread a valley at 4,000 feet, never had to worry about danger close, never had to look at a thermal image and decide in half a second if that heat signature is a farmer or a fighter." He turned to face her fully. "You know what we called pilots like you in my day?" "No, sir." "Sandy. After the A-10 Skyraider pilots in Vietnam who'd fly into hell to protect search and rescue operations. You know the Sandy motto." She shook her head. "That others may live." He smiled, and it was sad and proud at once. "That's what you did today, Major. You lived up to a tradition that predates both of us. Don't let anyone make you feel small for that." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her alone with her aircraft and his words and the cool Afghan night. She stood there until her legs ached, until the stars wheeled overhead in patterns that didn't care about medals or protocols or fathers who died while you were in the air. When she finally returned to quarters, there was another message on her phone. This one from an unknown number, but the area code was Virginia, Langley Air Force Base. "Major Vance, this is General Holland, ACC Commander. I've reviewed the footage and communications from your sortie today. Exceptional work. My office will be in touch regarding your next assignment. Well done, Airman." She read it 3 times, waiting for the catch, for the implied criticism, for the other shoe. But it didn't come. Just "well done" from a 4-star general who commanded all of Air Combat Command. She thought about her father, about his last coherent words to her. "Don't let them make you smaller than you are." She thought about Webb and his team, alive because she'd been in the right place and made the right calls. She thought about Madsen and his protocol and his luck. She thought about the next valley, the next call, the next moment when everything would balance on decisions made at 400 knots with lives in the balance. And she realized, finally, that she wasn't flying for Madsen's approval or her father's ghost, or even for the 8 men she'd saved that morning. She was flying because someone had to. Because the aircraft existed and the mission existed, and the gap between them could only be bridged by humans willing to strap themselves into ejection seats and turn aviation fuel into salvation. That was enough. That had to be enough. She saved the general's message, turned off her phone, and slept without dreaming. 3 days later, Kestrel was back in the air, flying combat air patrol over a different valley in a different province where different men were trying to kill different Americans. The war was fractal that way. Zoom in anywhere and you found the same pattern, the same violence, just different names and slightly different terrain. She'd launched at 500, had been on station for 90 minutes, and was beginning to think this would be one of the quiet sorties, the ones where you burned fuel and saw nothing and went home. Then the radio shattered that illusion. Chaos Main, this is Bonecrusher 37. We are troops in contact, taking effective fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate close air support. Grid follows. Kestrel was already turning, already descending before the grid coordinates finished transmitting. Bonecrusher. That was 10th Mountain Division, a convoy patrol that had probably hit an IED or driven into an ambush. She checked her weapons load. Full complement of 13-2 Mavericks, full rocket pods. The Warthog carried 11,000 pounds of ordnance. She intended to use as little as possible and as much as necessary. Bonecrusher 37, Reaper 12, I'm 8 mics from your position, descending now. What's your situation? The voice that came back was young, very young, trying hard to sound calm and not quite succeeding. Reaper, Bonecrusher. We got hit by an IED, 3 vehicles disabled, we're taking fire from compounds north and east, maybe 40 dismounts total. We got 2 wounded, 1 urgent surgical. Urgent surgical. That meant someone would die without immediate hospital care. That meant minutes mattered in ways that hours usually did. Bonecrusher Reaper copies. I'm visual with your convoy now. Mark your position with IR strobe. She saw them through her targeting pod. 4 MRAPs strung out on a dirt road, 3 of them stationary, 1 burning. Tiny figures clustered around the vehicles, returning fire toward. Yes, there, compounds on both sides of the road. The thermals showed muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers, dozens of them, overlapping fields of fire that had turned a road into a killing ground. The convoy commander, Bonecrusher 37, was probably 23, maybe 24, a lieutenant on his first deployment, suddenly responsible for 30 soldiers and decisions that training only pretended to prepare you for. Kestrel had seen it before. The moment when textbook tactics met reality and you discovered which one bent. Reaper Bonecrusher, we need that fire broken up now. Our wounded can't wait. She scanned the compounds with her targeting pod, marking positions, building the mental map that combat required. North compound, fortified walls, multiple heat signatures, heavier weapons based on the muzzle flash size. East compound, more dispersed, lighter weapons, but higher elevation giving them better angles. Rules of engagement required positive identification before engaging structures, but positive ID in a firefight was a legal fiction. If they were shooting at Americans from inside those walls, that was positive enough. Bonecrusher Reaper, I'm engaging northern compound first, then eastern. Keep your people's heads down. She rolled in from the south, giving herself clear run-in lines and separation from the convoy. 4,000 feet, 3,000, the compound growing in her sights. At 2,000 feet, she fired 1 Maverick missile, watching it streak toward the northern wall. The impact was precise, punching through mud brick and detonating inside the courtyard. Secondary explosions followed, ammunition cooking off, possibly an RPG cache. Before the smoke cleared, her cannon was speaking, walking 30 shells through the compound's interior. She pulled up at 1,500 feet, banking hard left, already lining up the eastern compound. This one got rockets. She pickled off half a pod, watched 19 missiles arc toward the structure. The building came apart in sections, walls collapsing inward, roof timbers catching fire. Bonecrusher, Reaper, both compounds are suppressed. You should have a break in fire. Reaper, Bonecrusher. Yeah, we got quiet. They stopped shooting. Jesus. A pause. Can you stay overhead? We need to medevac our wounded. Bonecrusher, I got playtime for another 40 mics, full load remaining. I'm not going anywhere. She circled above the convoy, watching through her sensors as the soldiers worked to extract their wounded, load them into the surviving vehicles, begin the movement to a landing zone. It took 20 minutes during which she marked every heat signature within 2 kilometers, ready to engage anything that moved wrong. Nothing did. The valley had gone quiet, the universal language of superior firepower. The medevac helicopter, a Black Hawk with red crosses on its sides, arrived with an Apache escort. Kestrel coordinated the handoff, ensuring the landing zone stayed cold, watching the wounded loaded and flown away. Only then did the convoy begin movement again, limping toward their forward operating base with one less truck than they'd left with. Reaper, Bonecrusher 3-7. The young lieutenant's voice was steadier now, exhaustion replacing fear. You saved our asses, literally saved our asses. Just doing the job, Bonecrusher. Get your people home safe. She climbed back to altitude, resuming her patrol pattern, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, leaving behind the familiar hollowness that came after combat. She'd killed today. How many? She didn't know exactly, maybe didn't want to know. The mathematics of violence were cleaner when left imprecise. When she landed at Bagram 2 hours later, there was a crowd waiting. Not official, not arranged, just pilots and crew and support staff who'd heard the radio traffic and wanted to see the pilot who was making a habit of pulling off impossible saves. Kestrel taxied to her hardstand, shut down, and climbed out to a round of applause that made her want to disappear into the tarmac. Colonel Madsen was there too, standing apart from the crowd, his face unreadable. He caught her eye, held it for a moment, then nodded once. A gesture so small it might have been imagination, but Kestrel chose to believe it was real, was acknowledgement, was maybe the beginning of grudging respect. That night, her inbox filled with messages. From the 10th Mountain Division commander thanking her. From the wounded soldier's family who'd somehow gotten her email address. From other A-10 pilots sharing stories of their own moments when the sky and earth and training all aligned into something like grace. And one from her mother, brief and to the point. Your father would be proud. I'm proud too. Kestrel Vance sat in her quarters, reading and rereading that message, letting it mean what it meant, letting herself feel what she'd been too disciplined to feel before. She thought about call signs and luck, and the difference between protocol and doing what needed doing. She thought about valleys and compounds and young lieutenants facing their first real test. She thought about the strange mathematics of war where adding violence sometimes subtracted death. Most of all, she thought about the morning light, about how it looked from 30,000 feet, about how it would look tomorrow when she'd do it all again. Because tomorrow there would be another valley, another call, another moment when everything balanced on a trigger squeeze and a pilot's judgment. And she'd be there, ugly aircraft and all, because that was the job.